Today we're going to take a look at a movie so bad that it sent one of the greatest actors of all time into retirement. Welcome to another episode of Not So Super Movie Reviews. Today we're going to be doing the movie The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which is based on a DC comic originally of the same name. It follows a bunch of classic literary characters that come together in the late 1800s to form a super team of sorts to take down a big evil threat using steampunk style technology that definitely could not have existed at the time. It had a critic score of 17% and a user score of 44%, which is actually a pretty sizable difference. To me, 17 says this is a garbage movie that you should never watch, and 44 says it was alright, but I didn't hate it. And so we're going to dive in and see what I might think of this film. As always, we're going to start by talking about what works about this movie. And as an honorable mention, I just want to say the practical effects. These days we get so much pure CGI in our movies, and I'm not crapping on CGI. There's some great CGI out there, and absolutely it has elevated sci-fi superhero movies just in an immense way. But this film did use those practical effects that I personally love to see. So anytime I see it, I always try to appreciate it, and this movie had some pretty good practical effects, actually. Where it opted to do practical effects instead of special effects. The first thing that I really thought worked about this movie, that's not an honorable mention, is just that it's over-the-top fun. I don't know how else to say it in a more eloquent way, but the idea of taking all these super popular classic literary figures like Captain Nemo and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Dorian Gray, all these random characters from literary history and some created for the movie, bringing them together on this like epic adventure. You can't deny that it's an epic adventure. It's a grand scale. I always appreciate that, when the scale of things going on is just big. He's got this giant, Captain Nemo has this giant ship. They've got all this crazy technology going on. It's just, and the action scenes actually aren't bad. I mean, the ones from the beginning of the movie are definitely better. The ones later in the movie kind of are your typical sort of action scenes, but for the most part, they're all enjoyable. And they're all action-packed. So yeah, just everything's a little bit over the top and a little far-fetched, and I'm okay with that. That's kind of the nature of a fairy tale kind of comic book style story. Maybe it didn't work as well as a movie. I've never read the comic, but I do have to say I appreciated that. So the second thing that I thought worked about this movie was some of the characters. There are some, bringing in all these different characters. I mean, this movie is essentially steampunk Avengers set in the late 1800s. And some of those Avengers are great. Most notably is Sean Connery as Alan Quatermain. Obviously, he's just selling this role. I mean, he's up against this team of people who have actual powers, and his power is just that he's a badass adventurer. And you 100% buy it the whole movie. And I would say that Sean Connery is one of the stronger things in this movie. You don't feel like his performance or even his character is dragging anything down. He's completely gold every time he's on screen, at least in my opinion. Nasiruddin Shah as Captain Nemo, totally awesome. When he pulls out his sword and starts fighting, it's always an amazing scene. His presence is always felt when he's in a scene. Tony Curran as the Invisible Man, he's hilarious, even though you really only see his painted face a little bit throughout the movie. He's still a likable character who does provide some comic relief. Peta Wilson as the vampire, I'm not crazy about the character, but I did like her portrayal of it. She plays it really well as the sort of stoic, badass vampire that you would expect. Also, Jason Flemyng as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was amazing. And that was actually one of my favorite ones besides Sean Connery, was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He plays both roles really well. And the interactions, the schizophrenic sort of interactions between them is actually a really great element.
We can do it, Henry.
What are you talking about?
You know we can do it. Together.
Yeah, that's pretty much everything that I thought worked about this movie. So let's get into what didn't work. And the first thing is the special effects. So I liked the practical effects, but the special effects just were not very polished. And they lean heavily on special effects for some really key scenes. Whenever I'm talking about a movie and its special effects, especially an older movie like this, I do like to go see what other movies kind of came out during this time to sort of compare them to the standard of the time. And when we're comparing them to the standard of the time, we're talking about Return of the King, Matrix Revolution, Finding Nemo, Kangaroo Jack, just some really stellar special effects. So really, yeah, this movie doesn't have a huge excuse to be as bad as it is. And it takes you out of the movie a lot because, like I said, it does really rely heavily on those special effects that are just very subpar at times. The second thing that I didn't think worked about this movie, and it'll sort of tie into my third thing, but is just the leaps in logic. This movie requires you to suspend disbelief. Like I said, it's an over-the-top fun adventure, but a lot of the story elements, it requires you to sort of just gloss over it and not think too much about it. One of the biggest offenders in this movie is your villain. He starts off as he brings the League together as this sort of secret British agent who's putting together the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which is supposedly this thing that's been around forever. He literally organizes the team that brings him down. Now, that's part of the twist, is that he wanted to get all of their DNA and their powers to try to sell them as weapons, but it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. He literally mobilizes his own demise when he's already got some crazy impressive weaponry and scientists who are able to create these crazy weapons. The villain is just one of the biggest problems in this movie because he's really not menacing at all, because he just gets his ass handed to him every time. He is not successful in pretty much anything he wants to do other than tricking the Extraordinary Gentlemen, who he brought together, and then they still just go and immediately kick his ass. So not having a menacing villain is honestly one of the hallmarks of a bad superhero comic book movie. And this one is a prime offender. There's a lot of other leaps and logics too. Like, this guy is selling these crazy advanced weaponry, and suddenly there's a super rich pirate in Captain Nemo who has this gigantic submarine/boat. And we just accept it. We're just like, oh, yep, he's a crazy advanced pirate for some reason. Never really explains why he has that. But yeah, this movie's just filled with little moments like that where they're kind of saying to you, don't think about it, which is part of its charm, but also part of its detriment. The last thing that I don't think worked about this movie is kind of a combination of editing and writing/storytelling, which is just bad pacing. There are certain chunks of this movie that move way too slow, and there are certain chunks of this movie that move way too fast. From the beginning to when they first get on Captain Nemo's ship and they're collecting the steampunk Avengers before that first big twist, that all happens way too fast. One of the most jarring examples of this is when they go to chase Dr. Hyde, or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That they just cut into a scene and all of a sudden Quatermain's found him and is chasing him. After kind of making a big deal about, like, he's going to be hard to find. And so, yeah, it's jarringly fast. Like, I need more time to understand this. Or I would like to spend more time getting to know our villain, or understanding who the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen are, and, where did this chick come from? We'd like to spend more time with that, but it moves way too quickly. Then for about a half an hour, we're on a boat, with just dialogue between the characters. It's expositionary dialogue for a half an hour. So it just slows to a crawl. We spend way too much time on Captain Nemo's ship. And then again, we jump into finding out the big twist of the movie, that the guy who assembled them is also the bad guy, and Dorian Gray is working with him. And then them going to finding his secret hideout, and destroying it, and having the final confrontation. That all happens way too fast, because it's just like all of a sudden we're like, oh wait, he's the good guy was the bad guy, and this is why we got to go stop him. That's way too fast. So they spent too much time on certain things that I didn't feel were as important, and not enough time on some of the most interesting aspects of this movie. Kind of like we talked about last week with Jonah Hex, this movie has a lot of interesting things going on that it just didn't do a good job of moving into a movie format. So who do I think was right? The critics or the users? And honestly, this week I'm gonna have to once again give it my own score of 55%. I really think it deserves to be above that 50 mark, because at the end of the day, when I finished this movie, I was kind of racking my brain to say, what don't I like about this movie? The more time I sat down and I thought about it, some of the glaring issues that we talked about became clear. But it didn't feel terrible as I was watching it. There's some undeniable issues with the movie, but I like it. It's an over-the-top adventure. It really takes some huge risks with some of the elements that it plays with all these crazy famous literary characters and the steampunk technology. It kind of goes all in on those things, and I super enjoy that. Like I said, it could have done a better job overall at telling a good story, but it did give you entertainment. It gave me entertainment, and I do think it deserves to be above 50. Thanks for checking out another episode of my channel. Make sure you like and subscribe. You can see a few of my other videos here recommended. If you want to make a recommendation for the next movie I do, just go ahead and comment it below, and I will take that into consideration. Just has to be 65% or less on Rotten Tomatoes, and originate from a comic or be about superheroes. Yeah, we'll see you next time.